which of course Dell is headquartered here. For those folks
Yep.
who may not know that, probably most folks do, but we
I'm-
are the home of
I'm a
Dell
native.
Computers and a lot of other high-tech companies. Now the home of Tesla as well, Tesla headquarters.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, like I say, I'm a native, so I remember when they weren't here, and I remember the first buildings they rented out of just to get started back in the boomer bust days. So yep, I know them well. Okay, I think we're going to get started because I don't want to be running late. So without further ado, welcome everyone. We're doing this webinar tonight on the psychology of disruptive growth. My name is Will Simpson. I'll be your moderator for this evening. I am a technology executive and executive coach and consultant here in Austin. I've been in and around Austin technology for the last 25 years. And currently I lead my company 10, 11, 12. I'm also the president of Agile Austin, a local 501(c) education nonprofit. And while I'm terrible at golf, I do love it. Ty Austin is the overall host for this evening. We're part of the largest entrepreneurial organization in the world. We're a membership-based nonprofit fostering entrepreneurship, mentorship, networking, incubation, and investing. Here in Austin, we've got Women Entrepreneurs, TYE College and High School, and the Ty Austin Angels for investment. You can learn all about us. Please do check out austin.ty.org and check us out. We have lots of events and lots of things going on. Right quick, just a little housekeeping. You'll notice that you have a Q&A button. That's where you can click and enter questions. We're going to try to keep those until the end of the presentation so we can have a smooth going presentation. If you have a burning question, of course, raise your hand and I can be interrupted. But we're really going to try to keep those all until the end. And everyone that's on the call, please stay on mute. That way we won't have any of the echo or background noise for our presenter. And on to the presenter. Roger Dooley is tonight. He is an author, international keynote speaker, and a serial entrepreneur in his own right. He's the founder of Dooley Direct and co-founded College Confidential. He has the best-selling book, Friction, and also is a founding thinker around neuromarketing blogs, and also is a key contributor to Forbes. Again, we're Ty Austin. I'm going to hand this off to Roger and let him take it from there. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Will. And I wish we could be doing this in person at one of the venues in Austin that you've used in the past. But of course, we're doing everything remotely these days because really I miss the interaction and the excitement of a live audience. But even more than that, I miss the ability to interact with the people before, after, in the hallways, in the lobby bar, and wherever. But we will try and make the best of what we can in this virtual format, and certainly feel free to connect with me afterwards if we don't get to connect today. Now, for starters, I wonder if you can just type briefly into the chat box what business you are in or you are thinking about being in from an entrepreneurial standpoint. There's no right answer, wrong answer here. I'm just kind of curious if we have anybody here who wants to volunteer a business area. And let's see, I'm not sure if I'm actually connected, so I'm not going to take too much time here to watch for the chat box. What I'll do is rather than move on, and I started off my career with every intention of climbing the corporate ladder. I graduated from engineering school with a degree in chemical engineering. Some years later, I went back and I got my MBA. And by the time I was 30, I was pretty well on my ladder climbing path. I was in charge of strategy for a Fortune 1000 company, and I really loved the job. And I chose that moment to bail out and become an entrepreneur. This is in the early days of home computers, and I co-founded a business, direct marketing to the owners of those computers. Over time, That morphed into more of a business orientation. Now, that ran for about a dozen years. Uh, Subsequent business I co-founded was in the IT outsourcing and networking space, which turned into several digital ventures, one of which, as Will mentioned, was College Confidential, which became the biggest website for college-bound students and parents. We sold that back in 2008 to part of the Daily Mail group. But even today, I see it's still getting tens of millions of page views per month and hopefully still helping students on their college path. But everything about being an entrepreneur is not fun. I keep this on my wall as a reminder. It's a letter from my commercial bank back in those direct marketing days, asking me to please show up with $1.5 million and change of my own money the next day because they no longer wanted to be my company's lender. And I didn't have anything approaching that kind of money. To make a long story short, my partners and I buckled down. We increased sales, we reduced inventory, we cut costs. We did what we had to do to get the bank off our back, and nobody lost their house, their savings, or their dog. But it's important to know that you will probably have some dark days as an entrepreneur, but that's okay. You will get past them and still succeed. Now, to begin with, if you would do me one small favor, please, if you would take your finger and simply tap the back of your hand, just one little tap. Okay, remember that for later. We'll get back to that. Now, I used disruption in the title of this because as entrepreneurs, we tend to be disruptors. We may be disrupting direct competitors or sometimes even disrupting indirectly by bringing a new product or service into the market that will affect some other area. And what I'm hoping to do today is give you a few tools to become a disruptor rather than be the disruptee. Now, 30 plus years ago, I had a little specialty lock that was frozen. The key wouldn't turn, so I took it to a locksmith and he looked at it, reached under the counter, grabbed a can of some stuff, gave it a quick squirt, and lo and behold, it began working perfectly. He wouldn't take payment for fixing my lock, but he did sell me a can of this stuff that I'd never seen or heard of before. Now, here's the weird coincidence. A week later, I was at a Formula One race just outside Toronto. And what did I see in the pit garage next to one of these exotic race cars, but a can of the exact same stuff that locksmith had sold me? Well, you might be wondering what it was, but probably a couple of you have guessed that it was WD-40, because we know we can fix anything with two things. If it moves and it's not supposed to, we duct tape it. If it's supposed to move and it doesn't, we WD-40 it. Now, mechanical problems tend to be pretty straightforward. Business problems, much less so. Wouldn't it be great if there was a magic spray like that locksmith sold me that would fix your business problems, give you more loyal customers, more engaged team members? Well, bad news, there is no magic spray, but there is one strategy that can give you those benefits and more, and that is a friction-based strategy. My simplest definition of friction is any unnecessary effort to perform a task. Any unnecessary effort to perform a task. And like for those of you who have a digital or in the digital space, probably think, oh, we know all about friction. They've been talking about friction in Silicon Valley for the last 10 plus years. Well, let me tell you, even in 2021, friction is everywhere. The problem is usually we don't see it. And if we do see it, we tend to ignore it. We just assume, well, that's the way it has to be. There's not a different way or a better way. We can't change that. One example we're all familiar with is taxis. For years and years and years, I thought taxis were a friction reducer. They were easier than taking a bus. They were much less effort than walking a long distance. And then Uber came along, and suddenly we began to see all the friction there was in that process, from standing by the side of the street, waving to try and hail a cab, to wondering if the driver is taking you on a strange route to run up the bill, to payment at the end, where you've got to deal with bulky credit card readers or fumbling with cash and foreign currencies, perhaps if you're in a different country. Uber eliminated all that friction. Now, if I have to take a conventional taxi, which there are a few places where Uber is still not allowed, it seems like a very high friction experience to me. A more contemporary example, before the pandemic, if we were going to jump on a web conference of some kind, we might do Skype, we might do a WebEx or a Hangout or something else. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and we are all on Zoom. It's become the generic term for any kind of web conferencing or web meeting. But it was not just a pandemic phenomenon. In the years leading up to 2020, they were already accelerating past their much bigger competition, Cisco, Microsoft. And then when the pandemic hit, they really took off. They quadrupled the revenue, added 100,000 new customers just in the first few months of the year. So how did they do that? Why did that happen? Did they have more engineers than Cisco or better engineers than Microsoft? No, I don't think so. I think it was because of their mission statement, which is to make communications frictionless. This is one of the simplest and best mission statements I've seen for any company, large or small. It provides perfect clarity to anybody working at Zoom about what they are supposed to be doing. It doesn't matter if they are a developer, if they are in compliance, if they are part of the security team, they always have to ask themselves, well, is this thing that I'm doing, is this change I'm making going to further our company's mission or hinder it? I tried to find Cisco's mission statement. I searched on their website, couldn't find it. Used Google to search their website, still couldn't find it. Finally, I found one on a third-party site, an older one, and it talks about shaping the future of the internet and creating unprecedented value for customers, employees, investors, ecosystem partners, whatever they are. Who knows what this even means? This is a high-friction mission statement. It provides no clarity to any of their people as to whether the specific activity that they're engaged in is going to really achieve the company's mission or not. So my promise to you here in the short time we have available is to give each of you a set of friction goggles, much like these, only yours will be imaginary. And by that, I mean, by the time we're done here, you will be seeing more friction than you were before. Let's talk a little bit about the science of friction. I assume we have a few dog people in the audience here. This is my little pup. He was a rescue. He's about 11 years old now. He lays around a lot. His favorite hobby is taking naps. But there is one thing that still snaps him to attention, and that is food. He's very motivated by food. So I decided to conduct a simple experiment. This is a regular dog food bowl. It slows down dogs who gulp their food too quickly. This is a slow feeder bowl. It forces dogs to eat a little bit more slowly rather than gulp their food down. This is a treat ball. Dogs really have to work for their food. They have to roll it around and shake it and squeeze it to get the food pellets out. So I decided to see how long it would take them to eat a meal under each of these conditions. In the regular bowl, it took about half a minute. In the slow feeder, about 5 times as long. In the treat ball, it took almost 10 minutes. That's 20 times more effort than in the regular bowl. Now, you might think he'd be aggravated by this, but he doesn't really seem to mind. We're still pals. But there is one key takeaway from this. In every single condition, his motivation was so high, he consumed 100% of the food. It did not matter how hard he had to work, he got every last crumb. That's maybe good news for him, but bad news for you because your customers are not dogs. If whatever you are asking them to do is a little bit more effort than whatever their other alternative is, chances are they will take that other alternative because friction changes behavior. Friction changes behavior. That's based on something called the law of least effort. It's been around at least since the Middle Ages. Much more recently, our Nobel Prize winner in behavioral economics, Daniel Kahneman, says that there is a law of least effort that applies both to cognitive and physical effort, and that people are fundamentally pretty lazy. I'll give you one example of that. The last international conference I was able to attend was on the lovely Dutch island of Texel. Great hotel surrounded by sand dunes with walking paths. This little gate was on one of those paths. It was not locked. It took almost no effort to push open. Despite that, many, if not most people, decided to simply not exert that minimal effort and walk around it. And this phenomenon is so common, there's a name for it. These are called desire paths. When people find an easier way to do whatever it was you intended them to do. Like, did the designers of this roundabout really think people are going to go all the way around it rather than just straight through it? And when you encounter this, you can deal with it in a couple of ways. You can try and prevent people from doing it the better way that they found, or do what I recommend every time: pave that desire path, make the way that the customers found even easier still. Now, BJ Fogg is a researcher at Stanford who is a pioneer in behavior design. He's famous for his Fogg behavior model, and he says you need 3 things to create or change a behavior. You've got to have motivation. The person wants to either do the behavior or they have to want to the result of doing the behavior. There has to be a trigger, or as he now calls it, a prompt. And then finally, there has to be ability. That translates into not too difficult, not too much effort. And even BJ says, don't focus on motivating people to do stuff, focus on making that stuff easier to do. Richard Thaler, our other Nobel Prize winner in behavioral economics, says very simply, if you want to encourage some activity, make it easy. This is pretty much the insight that won him the Nobel Prize, along with some academic research and that was also proven in the real world. But it's amazing to me how even today, so many business leaders, whether they are founders of a startup or whether they are CEOs of a big company, have not internalized this very simple concept. Now, if I asked you who the biggest US consumer lender was, you might think it was one of these big brands like Citi or Chase, but you would be wrong. It is Rocket Mortgage. Not only are they the biggest consumer lender, they are the best. Year after year, they are number one for customer satisfaction as ranked by JD Power. How do they do that? It is because of their easy loan process. If you've ever gone through getting a mortgage, you know that it is tiresome, it is complicated, it's confusing. There's forms, there's signatures, there's lots of instructions. Often you need help. Well, Rocket's motto is push button, get mortgage. They simplify the process in every way they can. They will import your data. They will autofill the forms for you. They were even mobile friendly at a time when their traditional bank competitors probably thought, well, who would ever want to fill out a mortgage application on a phone? That's just crazy. For Rocket and for other brands, Amazon, Uber, Zoom, lower friction has led to not just faster growth, but disruptive growth, where they have taken on and taken out much bigger competitors. Now, if we talk about customers and sales, there's two ways we can look at that. One is acquiring new customers or conversion, and the other is retaining customers or increasing loyalty. Now, in general, from the conversion or acquisition standpoint, less friction means more conversions. That's almost always true. I'm only going to give you one example, and it's a good one, though. It's WhatsApp. Back about 6 years ago, they were acquired by Facebook for $22 billion when they were almost pre-revenue. I think they had a few $1,000,000 in actual revenue. They were hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And an outside observer would say, well, this company isn't even worth $1 billion. Maybe they're not worth anything the way they're losing money. But what they had going for them was, in that year, they had not just 500 million users already, they were adding new users at 1 million users per day. Mark Zuckerberg saw this and it scared the pants off him. That's why he was willing to pay this incredible premium to acquire them rather than face them as a competitor down the road. So how do they do this? How are they adding so many customers at such an incredible rate? Well, one user experience expert did a tear down in their process. And we're not going to go through that. That could take up the rest of our presentation here because he looked at every element in it. But overall, he found that their onboarding took just over 2 minutes. And that's from the time the person fired up the app to the point when they were a verified user, ready to go and invite their friends. And I'll give you just two quick examples of what they did to take the friction out of their process. First of all, they pre-filled the country code. A lot of people in the United States don't even know that their country code is +1. So they pre-filled it so that people wouldn't have to think about it. If for some reason that wasn't their country code, they could change it. And they put the cursor right where it had to be, so you didn't have to tap the phone number box. You could just start tapping the number keys and your phone would be entered. And they did this pretty much through the whole process. They made it as simple and effortless as possible. And then at the end, and this was the other part of their genius, they hit you with this innocuous little screen saying, hey, we noticed that some of your friends are already using WhatsApp, but would you like us to invite those of your friends who aren't? And there's this little invite button that looks rather inviting, so to speak. And what they're really asking you to do is give them permission to spam all of your connections who are not using WhatsApp to sign up and go through that same 2-minute onboarding process and invite their friends. This circular process that was so simple, so easy, and so viral was what caused WhatsApp to be such a huge winner. Less friction for them and for many other companies has meant more conversions. Now, new customers are great, but loyal customers are even better. These are your highest value customers. You don't have ongoing acquisition costs. They are more likely to recommend you to other people. So how do we define loyalty? How do we measure it? Well, we could look at repeat purchases. We could look at avoiding the competition. All good metrics. But to me, True loyalty can be tested. One brand I'm very loyal to is Amazon. Their Prime trucks show up with alarming frequency at my front walk. But a few years ago, in our home state of Texas, my loyalty was tested. They began charging 8% Texas sales tax, where at that point, many of their online competitors were not charging that. I said, I'm going to shop around. I'm not going to pay 8% just because I happen to like doing business with Amazon. But when I look back a year later, my behavior had changed to almost zero. It was too easy to keep doing business with Amazon. I trusted them. I trusted that my credit card info was safe. I trusted that if they said it was going to be there in 2 days, it was going to be there in 2 days. True loyalty is emotional. It's unconscious. Consciously, I said, I'm going to shop around. Unconsciously, my brain said, keep doing business with Amazon. And it's not rational. If people are doing business with you because you have the best product or the lowest price, if somebody comes along with a better product or a cheaper price, they may well desert you for that other brand. So what does drive loyalty? Low friction, an easy experience is a very important driver of loyalty. And this is based on research by Gartner, the big market research company. They studied customer service interactions where people had to interact with a brand for some kind of customer service. 96% of the customers who said they had a high effort interaction also said they would be disloyal to that brand. That's 10 times as high as those who had a low effort experience. 94% of low effort customers said they'd buy again, compared to just 4% of high effort customers. And we know how important word of mouth is these days. People want ratings, they want reviews, they go to Yelp, they want to know what other people are saying before they make a decision. Well, 88% of the high effort customers said they would say bad things about the brand, compared to just 1% of the low effort customers. Let's go through those crazy numbers again. For those customers who said they had a high effort experience, 94% said they'd be disloyal, 4% said they would buy again, and 88% said they would say bad things about the company. Now, that's pretty scary, right? But there's one thing that's even more scary. That effort is in your customer's head. There is no absolute standard of effort that you can say, well, okay, we're there now. They aren't even comparing you to your competitors. They are comparing you to whatever they think is a low effort experience. It may be Amazon, it may be Uber, it may be Zoom, it may be something else entirely. But if you are making them work harder than that other thing is, then you will be high effort. Low friction experiences drive loyalty. Now, probably most of you are not in the fintech space or banking, but I think there's a lesson here for all of us. My friend Peter Ramsey is a user experience expert in the UK, and he did something that no human should be forced to do. He opened an account at a dozen different banks and fintech firms, performed a whole series of common transactions like making a deposit and doing an international money transfer. And he documented every single step of this process. Sounds like torture, right? Well, when he looked at the number of clicks to set up an account, the lowest was 24, the highest was 120. Now, clicks are certainly not the only effort metric that's important, but if you've got 5 times as many clicks as the best competitor, chances are there is a lot more effort in your process. And when you talk about clicks, you may encounter this guy who says, high effort, nah, it's just a few clicks. People expect that. It's best practice. We have to do that. We can't change it. It's legacy code. Give you any number of excuses. Well, I'll tell you a story. Back in 1998, Jeff Bezos and Amazon patented one-click ordering. Now, a lot of companies didn't think you could do that. It's too simple, too obvious. Barnes & Noble, their biggest competitor in that year, implemented a similar process on their website. And very shortly, they were locked in a big legal battle with Amazon. And after millions of dollars of legal fees and years in court, Amazon prevailed. Their patent was declared valid. What did they get for all that money, those millions of dollars, all that management attention? Remember that one little tap at the beginning? This is the level of effort that they imposed on their e-commerce competitors. That's all. One little tap, one little click. Barnes & Noble had to add a confirm order click after their buy now click. That's all. Doesn't seem like it'd be worth millions of dollars, right? Well, there was one other smart guy at that same time. Steve Jobs and Apple were about to introduce their new music store. He saw one-click ordering. He wanted it. They did not try and fight the patent. They didn't try and create a technical workaround. They paid Amazon $1 million so they could have that one tiny little click advantage over their competition. Now, there are all kinds of friction. Waiting is another kind. If you've ever sat around in that 4 or 8 hour window for the cable guy to show up where you can't leave, you can't start a new project, you can't do anything big, all that uncertainty, that is a form of friction. Well, when Ramsey looked at the time it took to get the bank account, fully operational, where the customer could do whatever they wanted, the best competitors got it done in 2 days. A few more did it in just 3 days. The slowest was HSBC, a big established brand that took 36 business days. That's like more than a month and a half of real time. How many of their customers would get frustrated after a week of waiting around and not able to do what they wanted and just open one up with somebody else? And I think there's one other important lesson from this. It is not just the fintech firms that were creating a low friction experience. In that 2 day and 3 day group, there were some big brands as well. So you just can't count on big competitors always being lacking agility, not being nimble. They too get this in some cases, at least. Confusion is another kind of friction. Don't turn your customers into hieroglyphics experts with cryptic symbols in your mobile app or on your website where they have to figure out what they do, or worse, click on it to figure out what it does. Make things easy, intuitive, obvious. Strive for frictionless. Now, let me give you some examples of real friction. Forms are always friction. Web forms, mobile forms, paper forms, people hate them, but sometimes we have to deal with them. However many steps there are in a process, typically, the more steps, the more friction. If people have to read instructions to figure out what to do next, that is friction. Things should be intuitive and obvious. They should just be able to keep moving without slowing down for that reading process. And as Gartner's research found, any kind of high effort interaction with the brand, whether it is tech support, customer service, getting a return processed, all of those things, high effort will be treated as friction and destroy loyalty. Strive for frictionless. One company that does a great job of this is Amazon. We already talked about one click, but they do a lot of things. When you go to Amazon.com, you are always logged in. You'd have to reformat your hard drive to get logged out of Amazon. They want that one-click button to be armed and ready to go. So if you see a product, you think, yeah, I've been thinking about buying this. They know that, well, I can have it in 24 hours, 48 hours. You'll click that button and be done with it. And you won't have to think about it until it shows up. But it isn't even just their ordering process. Years ago, they identified what they called wrap rage. You know what I'm talking about, these horrible heat-sealed plastic clamshells. You can't open with your bare hands. You need scissors or knives or machetes. If you don't stab yourself with the sharp implement, you may stab yourself on a plastic shard. People hate this packaging, but so much stuff still in 2021 comes packaged this way. And here's something really ironic. I've got a pair of heavy-duty shears I use for opening these things, and they were starting to get dull, probably from opening too many of them. So I bought a new pair, a very nice pair of shears from a very high-quality German cutlery company. How do they come packaged? In one of those heat-sealed clamshells. And even worse than that, there was an industrial strength cable tie just to be sure that you couldn't get into that package very easily. I had to go into the garage and get some wire cutters so that I could access my new shears. This is crazy. Back in 2008, Amazon created frustration-free packaging, simple cardboard boxes that you can open with your bare hands, minimal risk of personal injury, better for the environment. People like this packaging. Now, here is the surprise, though. Not only do people like the packaging, they like the products themselves better. There was a huge reduction in negative feedback on the products packaged that way. Another area that Amazon focuses on is making returns easy. I was in the direct marketing business for many, many years. I hated returns. They were expensive. They were time consuming. Often the merchandise wasn't resaleable and you had to scrap it. They're profit killers. Many companies try and discourage returns with difficult processes and limits and rules and such. Amazon makes it easy. You can get your return authorization in seconds online. You can take it to an Amazon locker. You can take it to Whole Foods, to Kohl's, to the post office, to UPS. Sometimes, if it's inexpensive, they will tell you to keep it, just donate it, toss it, whatever you want to do. They trust you that you are not ripping them off. They say, just get rid of it. We'll send you the product that you want, and you don't have to return the bad one. Even if you destroyed your packaging or lost your packaging, they solve that too. You go into UPS with your mobile phone, with their RMA barcode on it, and your bare product. UPS will pack it up, label it, and ship it back to Amazon free of charge. Is this expensive? Does this cost Amazon money? Hell yes, it does. It's really expensive. I was in that business. I know how much this is costing them. But this is why the year before the pandemic, not only did they increase their sales, but in a market that they already dominated, e-commerce, they increased their market share by 10%. When the pandemic hit, all bets, they just took off like a rocket. They had to hire 400,000 new people just to keep up with demand. Almost 500,000 new people to keep up with demand. Bezos puts it pretty simply. This has been his guiding principle since his earliest days. When you reduce friction, make something easy, people do more of it. Now, another big brand that has been focused on customer effort and user effort since their very earliest days is Google. I could give you a dozen examples. I'm only going to do one here because it's one that you can take advantage of, and that is autocomplete tags. These are little codes that your app developer, web developer inserts into your code that lets customers fill out even lengthy forms with a few keystrokes or taps because it autofills with previously stored data. Huge effort saver. But even in 2021, probably half the forms I encounter do not take full use of autocomplete. Just last year, I was registering for a conference. I will not embarrass the company that was responsible for this. They're a very reputable tech company, but it was a long form, a dozen form fields. Every single field populated with the word Roger because the coder had gotten lazy and simply copied a field from another form, replicated it a dozen times, changed the visible parts so it looked okay. If you looked at the web page, it looked okay to the marketing manager, but only when you went to fill it out did you realize that you would have to type in your full email address, your full company name, your full street address, your full telephone number, all the stuff that they wanted. Those 12 fields, hundreds potentially of extra keystrokes that were totally unnecessary had autocomplete been implemented correctly. Now, imagine if that had been a lead gen form or something, people would have just abandoned it. I think probably most people went through the onerous effort of filling it out to attend the conference. But and if you are targeting millennials or Gen Zers, these groups may be the most susceptible to bailing out on you. One study showed that 38% had reported they had abandoned a sign-up process because it was too difficult or it took too long. 38%. Another area that's really important these days is security. Every week we hear about new hacks going on. Unfortunately, there's a trade-off. Customer experience often suffers when you try and add additional security measures. Things like passwords that people can't figure out how to set up, much less remember a couple weeks later. And sometimes it's crazy. I was registering for another conference, a free thing, online registration just a couple months ago. This is not an antique example. And the process was worse than I've seen for any bank or brokerage firm who's even going to read all this text and interpret it correctly and fill out a password correctly on their first or second try. It's insane. I was buying some shoes at Nike. The very first password requirement was one mixed case letter. What's that? I don't know. I kept trying stuff. Finally, after about 6 tries, I got a password that they accepted. Amazingly, I was able to retype it from memory a second time, and I got my account and I got my shoes. But how many customers got frustrated after 1 or 2 attempts and said, I'll go someplace else? Unnecessary. Now, back when we were flying, I was on United.com probably a few times a week. Despite that, about once a month or so, they would fail to recognize the computer that I've been using for the last 5 years and say, whoa, this is a new device. And they start asking me questions about my best friend's birthday, what kind of books or movies I like, crazy stuff, always when I'm in a hurry to get to the airport. Unnecessary. They also have a very short logout period. So that typically if I'm making reservations, I've got lots of browser windows open. I've got one on the airline site. I've got one on various hotel sites, maybe Expedia and Kayak open, maybe the conference site to figure out where I've got to be, hotel site, all these things. And I go back to lock in the flights that I found that look pretty good, and they've logged me out and I've got to restart my search from scratch. I encourage you, have good security, but measure the compliance effort. If you are finding that you are logging people out multiple times during the same session, it's probably too short of a time delay. In fact, you shouldn't be logging people out unless it's absolutely necessary for your industry. If people are trying to set up passwords and it takes them 4 tries to get one that works, that's probably too difficult. Instead, be like Amazon, use intelligent security. I joke about their lax security and always being logged in, but If you try and say, send a gift card to somebody, that's like sending cash pretty much. Or if you decide to send a product to an address you never shipped to before, they will re-authenticate you with your password or with your credit card information. But the rest of the time, you are logged in, ready to go. That one-click button is always there for you to click. Now I talked about real friction. There is another kind of friction that is sort of imaginary friction. I call it cognitive friction. It's in your customer's head, but its effect on their behavior is very, very real. I only have one example of that. At the University of Minnesota, they asked people how long it would take to perform a simple exercise, 2 short sentences. Half the subjects saw it in the simple sans serif Arial font. The other half saw it in a slightly harder to read brushy font. So the first group said, take about 8 minutes to do on average. The second group, now remember, the text is the same, exercise is the same, no difference there. The second group said it would take 15 minutes. That's almost twice as long for the same exact wording. What's going on there? The cognitive effort required to translate that slightly more difficult to read font turned into a perception that much more effort was involved in that process. So I encourage you on your website and your mobile app and your print materials, use simple fonts, short text, easy to redesign, no gray on gray, use enough contrast that people can easily see it. Now, how else can you find your friction? Well, there are a lot of ways. One is it's important to measure the perception of effort. There's a product called Customer Effort Score. It's a lot like Net Promoter Score, except for effort. You don't have to buy that product. You can measure that perception in any way that you like, but I encourage you to measure it. You can capture effort metrics. You probably got more metrics now from Google Analytics or whatever other tools you're using that you know what to do with. See where people are slowing down, where they're stopping, where they're backing up, where they're not flowing through whatever process it is smoothly. You can observe their behavior either remotely or in person, maybe someday in person. You can use web-based tools like usertesting.com, where in a few hours you can get back information from web panels on your mobile app change, your website change, see if people other than your design team thinks it's intuitive and obvious. You can do click tracking. I guarantee you, if you are not doing click tracking now and you start doing it, you will find that customers are clicking on something that is not clickable. And if you find that a lot of them are clicking on something and you go to your designer and say, hey, people are clicking on this thing, your designer will likely say, well, that's because they're stupid. Well, no. If a lot of customers are clicking on something that's not clickable, they aren't the stupid ones. It's the design that's stupid. And it's important to count everything. Sometimes I ask people, how many steps are there in your checkout process? They think and say, well, 3, because there's like 3 places where you go next, next, next. It's important to count everything. How many times does the customer have to scroll, to click, to use keystrokes? There are so many important effort metrics that are part of this process that often are just completely ignored. Count them all. If you've got a lot of volume, you can do what big companies like Walmart does. They use behavioral analytics right down to the SKU level. Again, with sufficient volume, there are all kinds of behavior metrics you can measure. You can measure rage clicking. That's when people are clicking on something furiously because it's not doing what they expect it to do. You can even measure profanity in your voice menus. But I'll give you one pro tip. If people are swearing at your voice menus, you're doing it wrong. You can even ask questions. Now, I know I'm the neuromarketing guy that says never trust what a customer tells you, but that isn't always true. But when you ask those questions, don't use these horrible complex bubble charts that people just start clicking stuff to get through them. Make it very simple, intuitive, and easy. You'll not only get much more feedback, you'll get better, more accurate feedback. And don't be afraid right up front to ask for messy form data. This does not go easily into spreadsheets. Sometimes you see surveys that don't have this at all, or it's after all those crazy bubble charts. Put it up front. This is where you'll find out what you really want to know. I can't count the times I've been trying to tell a company something about my customer experience with them when none of the questions they were asking were related to the thing that I want to tell them about, whether it was good or bad. So I encourage you to strive for a friction-free culture, not just in customer experience, but in employee experience. We don't have time to get into the employee side of things today, but trust me, it is just as important. Now, I told you at the outset that I would give you a set of friction goggles, and I'm pretty confident that I have done exactly that, because once you start seeing friction, you can't stop. I have turned on your brain's reticular activating system for friction. Your RAS is a filter that screens out everything that isn't important at a particular moment. You can cross Times Square in New York City because your RAS is filtering out everything except the crosswalk indicator, oncoming cars, and the pedestrians right around you. You have had your own RAS experience if you've ever bought a new car, and within a week, you start seeing cars that look like yours everywhere. It's like, where were all they? They weren't there before. Those cars were there before, but your RAS was filtering them out as part of the background noise. Now it's saying, hey, this might be important, and it's letting them through. So keep activating your RAS for friction. Jot it down when you see it, do a screen grab, take a photo if it's in real life, and you have my permission to expose bad user experience, bad customer experience, whether it's within your organization or if you encounter it elsewhere. Make the world a better place, expose it when you see it. And sometimes you may have to push back against people who are on your team, people in legal, compliance, IT, security, who will tell you, no, we can't change that. It's a best practice. It's too expensive to fix. They'll give you lots of reasons, but you have my permission to push back against them. If you are not in charge, then escalate it to somebody who is, because this is really critical. You will probably encounter that guy who says, oh man, yeah, we could fix that. That's going to require changing that code. We don't have that in the budget for this year. Maybe next year we will. It's pretty complicated. It's legacy. Well, when you encounter this guy, explain that one tiny little click was worth millions of dollars to both Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs. Use that one click story to be more persuasive. Now, I think we have time for just one more quick dog experiment. I decided to see what my pup would do if he was given the choice of all three eating methods at once. We know his motivation is really high. So what did he do? Well, maybe unsurprisingly, he went straight to the easiest one, finished that one, went to the next easiest one. We're not going to watch him go through that whole process. And then finally, after there's no more easy pickings left, he carries the most difficult one off to work on in the other room. And this shows that just like people, dogs are subject to the law of least effort. Even dogs prefer easy. So I have a short quiz. I didn't warn you, but don't trust me, it's an easy quiz. According to Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler, if you want to encourage some activity, make it, can you type that in the chat box? Type it in the chat box if you can. Easy, of course. So I trust we have time for a little bit of interaction here. I've really enjoyed this. If we don't get to connect today, feel free to find me on social media. I am Roger Dooley in most places, or you can go to my website and you'll find not just my podcast, but my blog posts, my Forbes content and other stuff. You'll find links to that too. So it's been fun. And I hope we do have maybe a question or two or a comment, maybe some pushback, who knows?
Yes, we do have some questions. I'm going to start to read some of those now. Give me 1 second to get my act together. So the first question came in and it asked, can you please explain why the tiny white on gray type on Apple devices, why is it there? Can you explain why this is bad for Apple?
Well, the lower contrast, I mean, designers sometimes like pretty design. They think, things that look nice and maybe look a little bit different than what people are used to are good. And in some cases they might be, but if you are dealing with users or customers, you want there to be sufficient contrast for people to see what you want them to do. And so gray on gray, in fact, there was an experiment that was done by Adam Alter and his researchers some years back, where they had sort of an unwitting A/B test. There was a confession site, where there's a place where people go to tell about the horrible things that they did to other people anonymously. And what they found was this website initially had a gray on gray design. They changed to a much easier to read black on white design. And when they analyzed hundreds and hundreds of confessions, they found that people were more revealing in the easier to read design. And that's just one example. People can't read your stuff. They're not going to do it. It looks more difficult. One magazine that has great design that I'm sure we're all familiar with is Wired magazine. And I did a podcast, my Brainfluence podcast with Kevin Kelly, one of the founders of Wired. And I asked him about that. I said, they have sometimes use like shiny silver type on a gray background. where the only way you can read it is by holding the magazine at the edge and the right light to read the type, drives me nuts. And usually it's very tiny too. And I asked him why they do that. And he said, I have no idea. I hate that too. So, just because Wired is doing it doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing to do.
All right, thank you. People, if you do have more questions, please do put them in the Q&A section. I'm going to move on to our next question for Roger. For someone operating in a more of a client-facing business like financial services, there's an opportunity to leverage and optimize client experience. But when you're dealing with something as personal as the client's finance, trust plays a major role. What is the fine line between efficiency and leveraging technology to drive that customer satisfaction while also maintaining the trust?
Well, actually, in many contexts, trust is a friction reducer. The more you trust someone else, usually the lower friction there is in transactions. This is part of when Japan became the dominant industrial force for a while on the planet. It was in part because they had a very low friction experience where in a typical US company would place a purchase order with a lot of specifications. Then another company would fill that. There'd be a lot of communication back and forth. That product would arrive and that company would have to count it all and check it in and check its specs. In Japan, there was a huge amount of trust where say the prime manufacturer, auto manufacturer would say, hey, we need 10,000 of these parts by Tuesday. There wouldn't be any kind of complicated process involved. Those parts would show up on Tuesday and they would go straight into production because there was an extremely high level of trust. Trust plays a part in employee experience. We haven't had a chance to talk about that today, but to me it's so important. With GE in the Jack Welch days, they were a sort of traditional manufacturing company. They had unions. There was a lot of mistrust between the two parties. And Welch tried to break down the barriers, communications between all of the parties involved, whether it was hierarchical communication or side-to-side communication. Anybody should be able to talk to anybody. And they had a meeting of some executives and guys from the factory. The factory guys were there and they were kind of distrustful of management. One of the managers said, well, what can we do to make your job easier? Now, this is a question they hadn't heard before. Usually it's like, how can we get you to be more productive? And first they were kind of reluctant to say anything, but one worker finally said, I handle sharp equipment, a sharp product, metal product in my workstation all day. I go through about one pair of work gloves a week. When I wear one out, I've got to turn my machine off, leave my building, go to another building, wait in line at the tool crib, fill out a requisition form, then go hunt down a supervisor to sign it, go back, wait in line again, get my work gloves, and make my way back to my building and my machine and resume work. This can take an hour or two, depending on how busy everybody is and whether the supervisor is easy to find or not. And this was because of a lack of trust. Some previous manager did not trust that the workers would not steal work gloves if they were readily accessible. So they went through this process to make sure that they were all signed. And if somebody was requesting too many, maybe a manager would investigate, hey, why are you getting a new pair of work gloves every day? But what they did was they put a box of work gloves by the guy's machine. Problem solved. Saving an hour or two of productivity per week, plus the aggravation, plus they're telling that person, we trust you. And nobody started stealing massive quantities of work gloves. And even if somebody did grab an occasional pair, who cares? It's a $2 pair of gloves compared to hours of lost productivity. Trust is really important. Now, the challenge in trust in certain like financial spaces is, a bank could not simply lay its money out on the counter and trust that people would take what was theirs and not other people's. So you do have to have safeguards in place. But, I think the key is to make those as frictionless as possible while still guaranteeing that you are protecting your customers and yourself. And if we look at the UK study, those were all banks and fintech firms, all having fiduciary responsibilities to their customers, but there were huge differences in effort level between the various brands, not necessarily in the likelihood that there was going to be a problem, but just in the way they treated that issue. And I'll add one more question too. I think if you are a service provider providing client services, you are a friction reducer, because otherwise that person would have to be figuring out these rules themselves, these processes. should I make this kind of a transaction or that kind of a transaction? Is now the right time to take a profit, or whatever type of transaction it is? And by being that expert, you are making things a lot easier for them. And so to me, that is really reducing friction overall, and a very good position to be in if you can.
All right, Roger, we've got like 3 questions left. We're going to try to get those in pretty rapid succession so we can get them finished. And then I do have a bit of a wrap up there at the end.
Okay.
We've got about 5 minutes. So I just thought I'd give you a little 5-minute flag call there.
Okay, great.
All right. So the next one is on the reverse idea. Are there good examples for creating more friction? Is that ever a thing, or is that just not ever?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
You can, if you want to steer a behavior in a certain way, then you can add friction to that process. Now, I gave you an example of that's kind of a dark pattern type of friction. In other words, an unethical form of friction where making it very difficult for a customer to return a product to reduce your product. Well, that's serving the company pretty well because there are fewer expensive returns, but it's not serving the customer very well. Similar to making it difficult to unsubscribe. And even, I hate to say it, a very reputable company like Dow Jones, published with the Wall Street Journal, makes unsubscribing much more challenging than subscribing. But certainly, if you can encourage a good behavior, I talked about Thaler's work. A lot of his work was in the retirement space. By opting people in to retirement plans and saying, hey, you're welcome to opt out, this dramatically increase the percentage of participating. And this is a goal that's very important. It's good for the person, good for the company, and good for society as a whole. You don't want people showing up at retirement time and not having any savings. And it was a simple intervention that was very ethical. And I think, if you can opt people into something that will benefit them, that's an example of, where reducing friction. Or if you can make a less desirable choice, higher in friction. One company had people accessing their retirement account pretty much like an ATM. They had an unexpected car repair bill. They would phone up human resource, say, hey, I need $500 from my 401k plan. And what they did was they only added a form to that. They said, hey, no problem, please fill out this form. That simple intervention from going from a phone call to a simple form reduced the number of people who were kind of not abusing, but using their 401k for a purpose that wasn't serving them in the long run. So yeah, if you can add friction to a less desirable choice, but don't do it in a way that is just good for the company, but it's bad for the customer.
All right, very good. You kind of also touched on one of the others. So we have one more question that I'm gonna put out there that came in from earlier. So how does the application of neuromarketing more broadly than just what we're talking about today, but how does that application differ between B2C and B2B implementations, or even between, fast moving consumer goods and high tech? Is there a difference?
Yes and no. I think that certainly B2C and B2B markets tend to be quite different. And often, though, there's an assumption in B2B that our customers are entirely rational decision makers. They're looking at specifications, they're looking at guarantees, deliveries, all those rational factors that are obviously really important. Now, that would be distinct from, say, a consumer product like perfume, where the fragrance market is all emotion driven. Nobody talks about their product's features or benefits. They don't make promises about it. They don't talk about the quantity of essential oils or anything else. It's all emotion. They show you imagery of people maybe that you would like to be, or people you like to be with, or romantic settings or whatever. But B2B is not quite that emotional. But B2B customers are human. They too have human needs and non-conscious needs that they may not even acknowledge. That B2B buyer is not just concerned about whether this product meets those specifications. They're concerned about what's it going to mean for me. If this goes well, might I get a raise or a promotion? If this goes badly, am I going to get fired? What's this going to mean? Is this going to increase my visibility in the company? Will it, help me or hurt me? And so there are a lot of, and they may not even acknowledge that stuff. They may not consciously realize that's important to them, but non-consciously it's going on. So you still have to try and meet those non-conscious desires that they have, which often relate to things like security, success, advancement, and so on.
All right, very good. We're going to move into our wrap-up session here. first and foremost, Roger, I want to take a moment to thank you for being with us today. We absolutely, I know I learned a lot. I know we had some really good questions. Again, we put the LinkedIn out there on the Q&A that you can follow up with Roger, and ask further questions and further engage with him that way. If you have any specific questions from the panelists, or direct comments, you can always send information straight to us, webinars@austin.ti.org, and we will post the full recording, so that if you missed anything or anything like that you want to reshare, it's going to be out there. And I want to take one moment to talk about our next webinar, Economic Outlook. We have a renowned economist, Angelos Angelou. He is the founder of Austin-based economic development and consulting firm. He was the Greater Austin Chamber of Commerce chief economist and VP of economic development for more than 11 years, as well as doing startup acceleration and CEO of International Acceleration. And of course, he is a TI Austin charter member. And with that, we will wrap up just about on time. I appreciate the attendance of everyone tonight. Be well and have a great evening.
Thanks a lot, Will. It's been fun. Bye, everybody.
All right. It's been great. Thank you.